Okay, so it looks like we're recording. And what I'm going to do, first of all, is show you the homework assignment, just a quick overview of what they would be doing. So what I need to do here is to share my screen. Good. And I'm going to share my screen. And what I want to do first, I'm going to go to, let me ask you that if you're not going to be using the mic, to turn off the audio, because we're getting a lot of sort of the ambient sounds here. So if you're not using the mic, then you might want to turn it off for the time being. But don't forget to turn it back on when you have a question you want to ask. Okay, so please don't forget to do that. All right. So let me just go to the course itself. So this is the Canvas site that the students would have used, all right, or did use. Let me go to, they would go into the modules, all right, and when they go into the modules, they would first, so this, actually for every homework assignment, there was quite a bit to do. This was the online course, the Deutsch Interaktiv, which I don't know if any of you had a chance to take a look at that, but this was sort of a self-study kind of program that I kind of adapted for this, for interactive purposes. They got vocabulary lists. They would have to do these quizzes before they would do the threaded discussion and before they would do the voice thread. But let me just give you an example, and I'd like to see if any of you remember some of the things we did last week, or some of the sentences that we were learning. So let me just bring this up, and I hope you'll be able to see this. So you'll see here, could anybody, can you all see the question? Or maybe if I can make it a little larger, I hope I can.
Yeah, we can see the question.
Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, so now there's the first question. Is that a little easier to see?
Yes.
So is the answer 1, 2, 3, or 4?
4.
4, there you go, okay, good. So this is something they would have to be able to say, Isa, so-and-so, okay? How about number 2? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? Does anybody?
3.
3, right. Ich komme aus Deutschland. So this is something they would have to be able to say with each other, okay? Good. Let me move this over to here. And if you take a look at question number 3, what would be the answer for number 3? Would it be 1, 2, 3, or 4? Anybody? Did you say 2?
Yes.
Okay, good. 2. So it would be ich bin, exactly. So ich bin Lehrerin von Beruf. All right. So and then we have here question number 4. And where would question number 4 be? So ich, the 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can raise a finger. Can you see it? I know it's been a week since we did this, so it might not be self-evident. So is any guess? No guesses? Okay, it's number 1. So it's oh no. Sorry. It's ich wohne in Hong Kong. So ich wohne in Hong Kong. And the last question, the very last question here is, what would you think is it 1, 2, 3, or 4?
1.
1, exactly. So after they did these exercises, then I would expect them to, let me go back to the modules, to be able to, do you all use Canvas?
We use D2L.
Oh, okay. So they're all about the same, sure. And then after they would do that, they would look at a video clip. They might look at a video clip that I gave them. And let's just take a look at this here just very quickly, so that they would have something authentic. They would have something authentic to be able to, I hope you can hear this. One thing that I wanted to indicate, though, is I took the clip and I annotated it using, I think it was, I think I used QuickTime. QuickTime to annotate this. So, and I felt that there might be vocabulary in here that the students didn't understand, and it would help them to follow it a little if they were able to watch the clip. Okay, so with the annotations.
Hey du! Komm doch mal her! Wie ist dein Name?
Daniel. Daniel Barnier.
Das ist ein schöner Name.
Und wie bist du?
Ich heiße Juli.
Julie.
Okay, so, and I thought it was very important for the students to have also authentic materials to work with, okay? So, and then they would go and they would do 2 other exercises, and very quickly I want to show you those. Go back to the modules. Okay. And it was basically them introducing themselves to each other in the class. They would do a threaded discussion. They would utilize the vocabulary that we were doing in class, and I gave them sort of a model. I felt it was always important to give the students a model, and this was my model. And then they would describe themselves, identify themselves in the way in which that I did. The other thing that they would do is there had to be some spoken part here too as well. And let me give you an example of what that would be. And they would do a voice thread. This is not the voice thread that they did for, does anybody have their mic on? If we could mute the mic, that would help, because we're getting a lot of ambient sounds. But if you want to speak, please do turn on the mic. Please do turn on the mic. Okay. So what I want to do here is I use VoiceThread. I think VoiceThread is one of the best tools for sort of out-of-class assignments, and it's also used for speaking. Do you all have VoiceThread? Yeah, I would assume you would. So let me give you an example here. I had the teachers, I was trying to get the teachers involved with using VoiceThread. And this is a very simple kind of modeling type of exercise. And in this case, I'm talking about my New Year's resolution, which was about last year or 2 years ago. And then I asked the teachers to talk about their New Year's resolutions. I'll give you just a couple of examples.
Hi, everyone. I'm sitting in my office right now and conducting an experiment, and I was wondering if you would like to participate in it. Actually, I'm hoping you will. Part of the experiment is to talk about your New Year's resolutions. So I'll start out with mine. I want to go to the gym 4 times a week instead of 3. And I hope to eventually go entirely vegan. What is your New Year's resolution? Is it different, or is it similar to mine? I'd love to hear about your New Year's resolution. So I look forward to hearing from you, and bye. Till then.
I haven't made any New Year's resolutions.
Well, okay, Jay, so I'll ask you in 2017 if you have a New Year's resolution.
I'm going to skip down to here.
My New Year's resolution this year is not at all original. I decided that I did, in fact, want to get in better shape. And in order to fool myself into possibly keeping the resolution, I started before December 31st.
Okay. Another one here.
New Year's resolutions. I would say that I like to stick with one thing to make sure that I fulfill it, actually. And this year I'm really on healthier food choices. I like to eat unhealthy. I tend to start healthy, and then I tend to go unhealthy every day.
Okay, so you can see here that if you go down the list, I have quite a few. Let me give you one more example, maybe, and then.
Cześć. Hello. My New Year's resolutions are to be more positive, drink less coffee. Instead of 2 or 3 per day, I have only 1 in the morning. Eat less sweets, go to more orchestra concerts, see more movies, and have more fun. Thank you. Dziękuję.
Okay, so what's really nice about VoiceThread is, I mean, you could be, we were going to use this also in a MOOC. So if you have a MOOC environment, you could have maybe a couple VoiceThreads, and you can see it just goes right down the line, and it's easy, very quick to hear the contributions of the students. Okay, good. Yeah, so I think this is a very good tool for online learning and also for MOOCs, as well as blogs and other tools. Okay. Now, after I have done this, I'd like to go now into the presentation part. Let me minimize this. Okay, and I'm going to do. Somebody, if you have your mic on, could you lower your mic a little bit, because it's we're hearing a lot of the ambient sound. So if you could mute the mic, that would be perfect. Sorry to interject that.
So Shinji, maybe that's your microphone.
Because we're getting a lot of the extra. Thanks. Okay, cool. Appreciate that. Now. Let me see here. Let me make this larger, my PowerPoint presentation. Good. Okay, good. So we want to talk about online learning. Maybe we'll also talk a little bit about MOOCs as well, because I think that was also a topic you were interested in, and how you would approach it. I think that there is a connection between, or we can try to make that connection between face-to-face classes, online classes, and MOOCs. Okay, so let me just, where did I put my sheet here? Okay, so recently I was asked my opinion in an article for the Daily Pennsylvanian, that's our university paper, about an initiative to substitute language learning with computer coding. Now, it's not going to be happening here at Penn, but I mean, you probably all heard about this. I think it's happening to a degree in the University of Florida school system, and it surprised me that suddenly why computer coding would be considered an alternative to language learning, since computer coding is more or less a very solitary kind of experience. So whereas language learning is by and large a much different experience, that is dependent upon what most second language acquisition researchers would define as social interaction. Now, if you So, if you look at the classroom, this is the kind of interaction I think that on the left-hand side, we have this kind of interaction going on. But on the right-hand side, we have, students interacting with each other through computers. However, I think what we find a lot of times is that in the online classes as well as in MOOCs, it is a very solitary kind of experience. And what we need to be able to think about is how we can create opportunities for students to interact with each other using, for instance, on the right-hand side, their various tools that they have at their disposal to make it interactive and look like or emulate in some form or another what's happening on the left-hand side, sort of what's happening in the classroom. And I think that is possible, but we can sort of investigate this, and I'd like to provide some suggestions for that. Okay, so over the summer, I taught a course on how to develop online courses and how to develop MOOCs. And one of the assignments for the students is to evaluate MOOCs and online courses and to see whether or not the courses fulfilled the optimal conditions for language learning as set out by Egbert, Hansen, Smith, and Chow in 2007. And ironically, the conditions at the top of the list, for instance, interaction and negotiation of meaning, were rated low, insufficient, or completely missing in the students' evaluations of the courses and the MOOCs. So what came out of that is that they really felt that it was somewhat of a very solitary kind of experience. So not to say that it was exactly like computer coding, but it was in many respects resembled that. Okay, so this is one of the things that the students had to evaluate. They were given these kind of like benchmarks. The other thing I asked the students to look at is to see whether or not they all evaluated elementary courses. And was their experience of taking the elementary course, were they able to, to fulfill some of these can-do statements at the novice level of the actable can-do statements? And in most cases, the students felt that they could, for instance, say hello and goodbye. They could answer yes and no questions, and they could introduce themselves and provide basic information. Or they could write something about their members of their family or their friends. However, what was the problem is that they weren't doing this. They felt like they could do this, but they weren't using the language to interact with each other. It wasn't using, being able to fulfill these can-do statements in a real world kind of situation. So that was a problem. The other aspects that the students looked at was to see whether or not the courses would fulfill, the world readiness standards for language learning. Comprising, for example, communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities. So with all those different sort of benchmarks, from the optimal conditions for language learning, they also looking at the can-do statements from ACTFL and looking at the world readiness standards, they started to evaluate a number of online classes and also MOOCs. And I'd like to share with you some of their insights. And I'll start off by looking at the world readiness standards of communication. So as far as this is the students writing. I got their permission to use their comments here. There were 12 students in the class. From the perspective of communication, the students said, as far as the three different types of communication outlined in the World Readiness Standards, interpretive communication is thoroughly covered in the course material and various video and audio resources available through the course. So and that's quite obvious. I mean, they had a lot of content, and they had to be able to interpret the content in order to have any kind of meaningful, to be able to do the exercises, for one thing. So the interpretive communication was to a degree happening. And then there was the presentational communication is also involved in the discussion board posts and creative writing assignments. So the students felt that they could do presentational communication through the discussion boards and in the creative writing assignments. However, in most cases, the posts inside of the discussion boards were not mandated. And I think one of the students mentioned later on that there were very few students who were posting anything in the discussion boards. So it has to be made clear to the students that they have to make these posts in these boards, like in the threaded discussions or in the voice threads. Okay, so interpersonal communication is only tangentially addressed. So if a student's discussion board posts elicit a response, elicit a response from their peers, then that student could develop their interpersonal communication. As noted above, the course also provides resources for the students to find conversation partners, further allowing an eager learner to enhance their interpersonal communication. But the course material itself does not directly improve a student's interpersonal communication. And again, in most cases, I'd like to clarify this, is that there was not a lot of interaction that went on. In most cases, students were, based on their experiences, it wasn't mandated. It wasn't sort of integrated into the course. What was the focus of the course seemed to be the content. So the culture. The other aspect that students had, another important aim of the course is to teach a student about Italian culture, fashion, art, poetry, healthcare, and how to shop for food and clothes. However, the course does not attempt to change commonly held perspectives of Italian culture in an effort to deepen the students' knowledge or break stereotypes. So the students felt that they were learning some culture, but it wasn't really going in depth into the culture. And I think that a lot of these, especially MOOCs, offer an opportunity for students to go a little bit deeper into the culture. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But these are some of the observations the students made. Now, comparisons. For example, in class 13, it compares usage of of muy with English word very. All right, so this was a Spanish course that the students were taking. And then helpful explicit comparisons are made in the instructional presentations of material, making linguistic and lexical items salient for the students. So basically the comparisons that were happening here were at a very linguistic level. And there wasn't a lot of comparison, I think, at the cultural level. As this one student points out in the third statement. This is not, there is not much comparison required in the course, but as an autonomous student, those cultural hints in each lesson can prompt me to further reflect on different cultures. So the students were left on their own to basically come up with maybe some cultural differences, and that also was not integrated enough into the course to make comparisons. They were teaching the culture, but they were not really basically, I think, doing any kind of comparative studies. Connections. The course does a decent job of connecting to other disciplines such as art, health, music, and history, but I believe there is room for improvement in this area. For example, connections could be made to broader social issues affecting Italy, such as climate change and immigration. This would strengthen the course's curriculum in terms of both the connections and culture standards. So again, one of the complaints again goes back to the fact that the culture was very sort of superficial, and the students really wanted to have a more more interactive, engaging kind of connection with the culture. And I think that can only happen through more interpersonal interaction, and we'll talk about that too in a second. So as far as communities were concerned, in Sandy Kutschell's 2012 discussion of the community standards, she notes that a course can build community both within the class and outside of the school setting. And this is the student's evaluation. The intermediate course provides students with ways of connecting to a larger community through the Facebook page and other external sources for finding other speakers to communicate with. The discussion boards and blogs posts also provide help to build a community within the course. So the students themselves are aware that there are these tools that can build communities. And I think these are things we need to look at, the tools to build communities that might not be sort of part of the platform itself. So it might not be part of the platform of Canvas. It might not be the platform of Coursera, but we can take a look at what personal tools the students use to interact with each other and use them as for educational purposes. So there's community. So some of the general content comments of the students was that the material is well designed and very educational. The course addresses listening, reading, writing, grammar, and vocabulary in various ways, but does not give the students a lot of opportunities for speaking practice. So again, the idea of communicating with each other was not high on the students' list in their evaluation of the courses. The course has some ambitious learning goals. These include improving students' conversational skills, specifically about daily life, current and future plans and hobbies, reading, writing skills, and grammar. And I think that although these courses may have advertised themselves as being able to help the students improve their conversational skills, it was learning how to do it rather than actually practicing it. The courses assesses students' progress by tests, which account for about 90% of the students' grade. So again, a lot of these courses did assessment based on tests, and I think there's other ways of doing this, and we'll get to that at the very end of our conversation. Are there any questions so far?
Lauren has a comment in the chat box.
Oh, let me see where that might be. I have to think. I got to lower this a little bit. Okay, good. Let me see where Lauren is here. I think I have to get out of the share window to do that. Would you?
I could just speak it.
Okay, Lauren, that would be great. Thank you very much.
So I'm wondering if you have a technology solution for interpersonal oral communication, because it seems like the issues that you're mentioning are really more instructor approach and course content based, not necessarily technology that was the issue that caused the lack of deeper cultural knowledge and possibly the opportunities for interpersonal communication.
So you mean what would technologies that I would use?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, VoiceThread is great for presentational.
Right.
What sort of technologies do you recommend or could be used to develop that interpersonal communication that wasn't integrated?
Okay, let me get to that in a second, and I think I'm going to get to that, and I hope we might. Yeah, so give me just a chance for that, and let me just move on for just a second. That's a very good point, and I'm glad you asked it. But let me just finish this general comment here. So the course would be greatly improved if there were some suggestions for how the students could use the material to learn. For example, asking the students to use a news website to research and report on a current news story, posting their presentation on the discussion board. This approach would also help the course integrate more meaningful tasks into the coursework, which as it stands now tends to be grammar-focused exercises and some activities where students are asked to write creatively or on a discussion board. So again, the content is used to it's like more of this study kind of mode. Rather than using the content as a basis for discussion. And in general, I think this is the paradigm that the students experience in their evaluations of the online classes in general, where there's the instructor and they're just learning from the instructor and learning content. And so, but really what we want to, and I think I'm going to get to this question you have right now here, Lauren, is that we want to try to incorporate we don't want to throw the baby out with what do we say, the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to throw that out, but we want to add on the right-hand side, this way of the students using their own personal technologies to communicate with each other. This is already happening in several MOOCs where students sort of coalesce around, common interests that they find that their that they are posting. In the thread discussions, they find somebody that they can identify with, and then they start coalescing around these different topics and forming these smaller groups. So the issue is that it's not really integrated, it's not mandated, and I think there needs to be sort of more tasks involved in these kinds of courses that sort of force the students to interact with each other. So I think what we want to do is to be able to have maybe this instructor-based kind of teaching, but connect it more with this more collaborative kind of learning where the students are interacting with each other and then reporting back to the instructor. So they might be using Twitter, they might be using Facebook, they might be using web conferencing tools, they might be using Skype, but the whole purpose of it would be to have the students use their personal tools to be able to interact with each other. And so does that help any, Lauren? Does that? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me move on a little bit, and maybe we'll see. So the idea here is to have the students to use the technologies to get to know each other in one way or another, is to use all these different kinds of tools that they have at their disposal in order to interact. So the kinds of interaction that we're seeing here are learner-to-learner interaction, learner-to-content interaction, and learner-to-instructor. So in a lot of these online courses, I think we'll see learner-to-content interaction and we'll see learner-to-instructor interaction. But again, the absence of learner-to-learner interaction is frequently an issue. So especially in the case of MOOCs, but I think this also holds true for online courses. Bear with me for just a second here. What we want to try to do is to move away from just offering content-based classes and moving in the direction of task-based and network-based. And I think we can get to network-based if we start to use more task-based activities. But I don't think in the courses that the students were evaluating, what they saw were more activities rather than tasks. And I think if they were more involved in tasks, we could get to that level of collaboration where they are in a more network-based environment, a connectivist-based environment, and where they're socially interacting with each other and gaining knowledge from each other. Okay, So how, I mean, I've been playing with this idea for a while. And just to give you an example of kind of like learner-to-learner interaction, years ago I used a lot of Second Life, and I think that it's not being used much anymore. I guess most of you know that, but I would go online. At one time, I got online at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I ended up couldn't sleep, so I ended up speaking with someone who was. I went to a German museum. It was in Munich, and people were just kind of like walking around, milling around all these avatars. And I ran into someone. I bumped into him, and we got into a conversation. And he was from Moscow, and I was from Philadelphia, but we were learning about each other in German. So I found that to be a very unusual experience. I thought to myself, when would this have happened 10 years ago, where I was interacting with somebody from Moscow and speaking with that person in German? So it gave me the idea of possibly at some point to create a MOOC that would involve the teaching of, for instance, German or some target language, where people were interacting with each other and learning about not only German culture, but also learning about each other's cultures. So there would be kind of like this cross-cultural interactions going on. And I think there are the technologies that can do that, but the students and a lot of the times have to self-organize. They have to self-organize, their partners and so forth. And then Second Life, I think, is one example. However, it's not being used much anymore. Now, one other idea here is that I got another idea from telecollaborations, okay? So in telecollaborations, students from different countries collaborate together using online internet tools such as email, chat, web conferencing tools, web page building, as well as audio and video conferencing to carry out collaborative projects and to learn about each other's language and culture. So, I mean, this is more of a bilingual kind of, project. But I think these internet tools, such as email, chat, web conferencing, web pages, and so forth, web conferencing can also be used sort of in mono-linguistic environments as well. And I'll give you an example of that in just a second. The other thing that I thought that I walk away from telecollaboration, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Gillette Furstenberg's project, where she, on the website, she asked, for instance, the students, what was their, what did they think of when they heard the word individualism? And, the Americans always thought of freedom, independence, pride, and so forth, whereas the French students felt of egotism, egocentrism, and indifference and loneliness. And I began to think about how students from around the world would respond to such even stimuli as a word. How to get them sort of thinking and getting to know each other, and I think also ways of building bridges with each other by learning about each other, but doing it in a foreign language. And then also, I guess you all know about remember the experiment with Julie Belts in Penn State. This is just a continuation of the Gilbert Furstenberg kind of project, where the students were asked to talk about, their universities. And the Penn State students, of course, were talking about the football games and showing their mascot, and the Germans completely had no understanding for for why the students would use a teddy bear to represent their university. So then he's thinking about how to get the students to respond to different kinds of stimuli. Was one. So from the telecollaborations, so I started thinking about how to get the students to respond to different kinds of stimuli, and then also how to use the different technologies to have the students connect with each other. Now, Marie-Therese Baudelaire, she is the co-founder of the Erasmus Student Exchange Program between the University of Limerick in Ireland and the University of Algiers in France. And she is a strong advocate of multicultural approach in the classroom. And she did this project. And I think through the project, the students, and it was done only in French, and it wasn't sort of like telecollaboration where it was bilingual, but it was really monolingual. And they weren't just talking about, the very superficial aspects of culture, but they were going much more deeper into the social aspects of culture. And this is the stages in which he did it. And I think this was what I want to get at here in terms of how to do tasks. There was sort of the I stage, where the students did sort of the interpretive kinds of learning. They chose a topic, they found an article on a topic from French newspaper, a website, and they interpreted it. So this is more of the interpretive, interpersonal kind of communication that was going on. And then the students would post a summary of the article plus post a specific question on a chosen topic for the native speaker partner. So they were interacting with the Irish students were interacting with French students, but they were doing it in the language and not in the target language, but not doing it in a bilingual situation. So the topics that the students were engaging with were anywhere from the refugee problem to same-sex marriage, to the reform of the school systems, and just to give you an idea of the kinds of output that the students were writing. And in this way, the Irish students were acquiring a vocabulary to talk about the different social aspects, to be able to engage with each other on these issues. And so then the I and the you stage was expressed through the ideas. They were sharing knowledge, they prompted each other for opinions, and they attempted to reach a consensus or a solution. So this is where the we stage came into play, where they were not only talking about the I, and they were not talking simply about you, but the students then had to reach kind of a consensus, and they had to synthesize their ideas and their opinions. So they synthesized what they learned in the telecollaboration and submitted their observations to the instructor. So this is what I was thinking about in terms of an online class or a MOOC, is that you require the students perhaps to talk about themselves, and even in a basic language class, I think this is even possible, where the students can, for instance, talk about if it's their vacation, where do they like to go on their vacation, what they'd like to do on their vacation. And then what they would do is they would get together and talk about, they would synthesize and collaborate with each other what they both like to do, so what are the similarities, and then also what are some of the differences. So this is what they would submit to the teacher. They would submit, the teacher would not only read what the students write individually, but the teacher would also get back from the students what they like to do, in a we kind of post. So we like to do this, we both like to do that, but there are certain things that we don't like to do. So it was trying to go from the I, where you talk about what you like to do, you start exchanging ideas with each other, and you're doing this all through some form of technology that the students organize on their own, and then they would synthesize their conversations and submit that to the instructor. And I'd like to give you the students in Therese's class talked about their experience, and that experience was, this exchange made me understand the importance of not only reading pieces of information, but also talking about them with someone from a different culture and background. It made me discover other issues. So really what I think here is that although we say someone from a different culture, the focus here is being able to talk about it with someone. And that's what's not happening, I think, in the classes, where this exchange is sort of just, there isn't an exchange. The students are simply learning. The content, but they're not engaging with someone about the content. And I'd like to give you an example of what I did in a class. That was in a class, we had the Fulbright organization here this past summer, and there were students from around the world in the class. And there were about 60 students. And I wanted to give them, I wanted to sort of emulate what Marie-Thérèse Baudelaire did, where she did the I, the you, and the we kind of project with the students. And what I did was, there were students from Russia, there were students from China, there were students from Germany and Austria and Arabic-speaking countries. So I played them the song by Aretha Franklin, And I had just finished reading a lit review about African American scholarship. And as I was reading the scholarship, they were focusing on the importance of the African American church in all of the eras of African American scholarship. And as I was reading this, I was thinking about Aretha Franklin and how she sings and what it would be like, in an African American, in a Baptist church, for example. So I wanted to find out, I had this sort of cultural background already, and I wanted to find out what students from around the world would think about this song, but we weren't doing this virtually, we were actually just sitting in a room. So the first thing I did was I played the song, and this is where I asked the students to interpret it on their own, to write down a couple words, maybe a sentence of what they felt when they heard the song. So that was kind of like at the eye level that Marie-Therese was talking about. And then I asked the students to share with each other at the table. They were sitting at tables of about 6, what they thought. What did they think about the song, to share their opinions. And then I asked one of the students to be a scribe, to function as a scribe, and then to jot down what the students wrote and to synthesize sort of the commonalities and the differences between what the students felt was their opinions. And it was very interesting to get the opinions of the students. So one student stood up and said, well, the French student said I wanted to get up and dance. And the Irish student sitting with the German student said, well, we felt we were inside of a car and we wanted to roll down our windows. And the Russian students all said, well, what we wanted to do was, we felt that she really wasn't singing, she wanted to sing jazz, but wasn't unable to do it. But what was really interesting was when the Arabic speaking students said, we felt empowered. And I think everybody in the room sort of was surprised at that kind of response, but I think that is the kind of response that basically Aretha Franklin probably wants out of people, is that when they hear her music, they feel empowered in some way. And then I started to, I started to think, I'm teaching right now a critical writing program where we do this kind of work where the students do in a collaboration. They talk about their own writing. They sit with each other and they share their ideas. Then they put it all together and they upload it to a threaded discussion, and they talk about their writing as, one person is the scribe and synthesizes what they were talking about in the group. And there might be 3 or 4 groups. One person stands up and does the presentation, and then the students vote. So there's kind of like a ranking that goes on. They don't vote on who's the best, but who has the most interesting. And I think this kind of paradigm can be used in an online class where the students, again, it has to be at this point, I think there's not always these tools inside of these platforms for the students to engage directly with each other, either synchronously but there's always these asynchronous tools. But if we mandate that the students find time and use their own technologies to engage with each other, to do this kind of collaborative work, to reach a kind of consensus, and then to report back to the instructor, I think that it would help to increase the kind of interpersonal communication that should go on in a language classroom. The other thing that I think and I'm getting this also from this critical writing program, is that in a very large class, and also another way I think to get the students to engage with each other is to have them do peer reviews and in an online class. So, and I think this is also very possible to do. There's also a tool out there called peer review, and students can assess each other's work and provide some feedback. But of course, we have to give them very clear rubrics of what they would be looking for and how they would be assessing each other. And the other thing that I think would be that is not in a lot of the online classes is portfolio assessment, where the students create a portfolio of their work and then submit that at the end of the semester to the instructor. So in order to help make the class more interactive, I think we can do this through this I-U-we kind of paradigm with technology, doing peer reviews where the students review each other's work, and then also portfolio assessment. And I think together with these 3 different maybe components, we can help to make the online classroom a little bit more interpersonal and interactive. And with that, when I look about MOOCs, and this was, I found this statement when by H.C. Evans. He's the co-founder of the Global Poverty Project, but I think what he says here fits very well with the with language learning and the purpose of language learning. When thousands of global citizens find inspiration from each other, it is amazing to see their collective power. And I think if we can sort of tap into that, we could create a really dynamic community of learners interacting with each other and learning about each other. And with that, I turn it over to a Q&A. Is there any anything unclear or any comments or questions? If you have them, please, you'll need to turn on your microphones.
I think the we stage is very interesting. So the activities in at the we stage won't take up the class time. And then so whatever tool the students are comfortable with, they can use it out of classroom as long as they submit the final observation to the instructor, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So this can happen very quickly. I mean, in sort of like this kind of collaborative, students sitting in groups, it can happen really within 15 to 20 minutes. So that is what I haven't incorporated in the online class. And that's the problem that I find is that the students, although they were doing presentations and they might have been interacting with me a lot in the classroom or outside of the classroom and in the interviews, because I did the, I would do interviews at the end of every week with the students. There was not enough interaction between the students, although they were interactive. They were interacting with each other in the virtual classroom, in the breakout rooms and in the chats, for example. But I wanted them also to be able to interact with each other outside of the classroom. And I think now I have something in my repertoire for sort of prompting that kind of interaction outside the classroom, where you give them the task of first interpreting something or explaining something or explaining something in a post, and then they have to read each other's post and then share with each other their opinions or about their opinions about what they read or what they like to do on their vacation, for example. And then one of the students becomes the scribe and synthesizes what it is that they've been talking about with each other or writing with each other about. I mean, there's different ways for students to communicate with each other and create this kind of interpersonal interaction. So what makes them sort of responsible for their work is that they have to do this synthesizing. They have to synthesize their work and report back. And then we can move it on to maybe even sort of like a ranking kind of activity where the students in the classroom have to read each other's synthesized descriptions and then rate them. Maybe not rate them, but find out which one did you find the most interesting, and then can continue the conversation and say why. So I think there's a lot of mileage that you can get through an activity like this.
Well, I attended last Calico's presentation where the Spanish instructor was using a tutor service. So the students who took the online course, they also have opportunity to work with this third-party tutor service.
Mm-hmm.
Then they can have a native speaker to practice with. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's a great idea, and I think that the idea of students interacting with the native speakers is important. And in a MOOC environment, I think it's probably even more the affordances of interacting with native speakers is probably more available to them than it would be in a class, in our classrooms, in our classrooms that would be online, for example. And how could that happen? Well, in a MOOC, you could invite native speakers to participate in the MOOC. And if you have people from around the world, as for example, participating in a MOOC, they might be ending, a native speaker might be finding it interesting to interact and share his culture with somebody from India. And it might lead to reciprocal kind of learning experiences where, the native speaker shares their language too at the same time, and vice versa. So I think the idea of having tutors, or maybe sort of peers interacting with each other in sort of these reciprocal learning environments is probably the wave of the future, I think, as far as MOOCs are concerned.
Thank you.
Can you speak at all to differences in communicative proficiency levels of students in an online course versus a traditionally taught course?
Mm-hmm. I think I can. So, for example, I taught 4 summers a 101 and 102 class, and they were integrated into the German language curriculum. They were taught differently, and the materials were taught differently. But since I had taught for 10 years the face-to-face classroom, I knew exactly what the students needed to be able to do in order to complete, the proficiency, sort of like the I wouldn't call it the oral interview, but sort of like an oral interview at the end of the year. So. And it was and I always had somebody else interview the students, and not just have me interview the students and say yes, they could do this, and everybody would believe me. So I had sort of an external interviewer meet with the students, and although that in most cases it worked out really well, and you could see maybe some differences in terms of the students' abilities to express themselves, but in general, there seemed to be not too much of a difference. However, I think the real test of whether or not the students were successful with learning the language, some of the students who had taken the online class continued with German at the intermediate level in the face-to-face classroom. And in those cases, I was interested in finding out how they were faring, at the intermediate level in a face-to-face classroom. And the teacher told me, or the teachers told me, in general, they found no difference between how the students were interacting, the students who had come from a face-to-face class environment and students who had come from my online environment. So I think they're able to continue and more than just survive.
Do you think your online students were self-selecting at all, in that they were perhaps a different student than the ones who would take the traditional class? So I'm thinking, for example, students who tend to be very uncomfortable speaking out in class. One of the things that having all of that in-class practice gives them is sort of that comfort level with speaking, so that when it comes to an assessment, they're comfortable doing that. Whereas your online students who maybe don't have as many opportunities for that, have they already self-selected and they're comfortable with that and that's not their issue? Or was there not really necessarily any self-selecting going on?
I think they were selective, and I can give you an example. One time I had a student who was one of the better students in the class. I mean, he was interacting with me, and there is interaction that goes on in the online environment. I mean, they're interacting through chats, and they're interacting through the oral chat rooms, to the oral breakout rooms. So there is that interaction going on. But I think the difference is, Lauren, is that when they're interacting with the instructor, and you call upon them, they don't feel as self-conscious when they're going to give an answer. And this was something that they wrote in some of their evaluations, that they felt much more comfortable when they would sort of in the plenary situation where they would give a response. They didn't feel that the classroom was looking at them. So I think they became they became risk takers in that respect, and were less inhibited. However, as I said, I had this one student who was doing very well, and I was really excited by his by what he was producing, and he dropped the class. And I thought, oh my God, what did I do something, or what happened here? And I wrote him an email, and he wrote me back and said, this is not the kind of environment that is for him to learn a language in. And I think one of the things to do is that I became aware of is to explain to the students what it is we're doing here in the online classroom, what is the purpose of these different activities, and what is the goal of these activities, became very, very important. And I think that made a world of difference for the students. I mean, we do that in the face-to-face classroom too, but I became more aware of that in the online environment. So, and in terms of the evaluation, and I pointed this out last week, the students in general, the evaluations that they made of the online class were very close in terms of their satisfaction level with as one would find in a face-to-face classroom, and that was very promising as well. What I'd like to do is a MOOC. And and what is very interesting, I think, is that and I found this for our other teachers that are doing online classes in Italian and in Turkish, but it's particularly in Italian, with the experience that they have on online teaching. They gain these experiences, and they try to take what they've learned from the online environment and incorporate it into the face-to-face environment. And it works vice versa. So, I think it's a two-way street here, where we can learn from the online environment and bring it into the face-to-face classroom, and then we're not just chucking the face-to-face environment. We're learning that this is a very important environment, but how do we simulate that in the online classroom and in the MOOCs too as well. I hope I was clear with sort of what I would like to move towards in terms of online teaching, but if there are any questions, please ask me. And again, what I would like to point out is what I showed you last week, I think is it is successful in the sense of terms of the students interacting with each other and their level of satisfaction and the level of language that they're producing. But what I find missing when I think about it, and as I'm moving a little bit further, is that they have to be able to do collaboration outside of the classroom. Not only, although they're doing sort of asynchronous kind of work and they can read each other's work, they can listen to each other's work, they're not doing anything with it beyond that. And I think what they need to do is to do this kind of I, you, we kind of project to make it much more collaborative. And I think what I would also like to introduce is more kind of portfolio assessment, and where they have to put it all together and they can see their progress from the beginning of the class, from the beginning of the semester towards the end of the semester. And they do see that. I mean, I ask them to periodically, when they look at their thread discussions, to see what they were posting in week 1, whereas what were they posting in week 6, or what they were writing, or what they were, speaking in their posts in their thread, in their voice threads in week 1 and week 2. But I think it can be much more reflective, instead of like just looking at it, asking them to reflect a little bit more of what they've learned and what they're able to do. And then more of a portfolio assessment is asking the students to get together. And I don't actually have all the rubrics myself for this particular online classroom, but it is something that I would be working on. We have these rubrics in the critical writing program that might be adapted to a degree for online language learning.
Do you think the online students actually work harder than the face-to-face class?
Personally, yeah, I do. I think they work harder outside of the classroom. For one thing, it was the summer classes, everything is very condensed. I mean, I don't know what this would be like, over the course of, say, a 12-week semester. But in a six-week summer course, I think they have to be very motivated to be able to be successful in the class. So, and in general, I find students who take online classes to be motivated. And I don't know what the reason for that is, but I think they seem to be more motivated, more engaged. There's a much, I think also in the online environment, there's more participation. As I was saying last week, students have different ways of participating at the same time. And it's sort of in a which you can't do in a face-to-face classroom. And the example that I gave you is that students could be responding in written format, while simultaneously a student is responding in verbally. So you're not just waiting. The students are not just waiting for one student to finish a response so that they can respond, but they're responding simultaneously all at the same time, either through a written chat format. They can all see each other's posts in a written format, or they can hear each other speaking sort of individually. So I think that kind of engagement is motivational. I mean, the research needs to be done on this. I mean, looking at the online environment and seeing. One other thing I think that happens in the online environment, I hope I'm not going into another tangent here, but is the community building. I think there seems to be more community happening in the online environment, although there's a lot of community happening in the face-to-face environment. Students are in the classroom together. But I think when they have to go online and you might ask them to look at each other's posts or they listen to each other's posts, they get to know each other. They not only get to know, for instance, maybe each other in a small group, but they have the opportunity to really learn about what their students like to do on their vacation from within the context of the entire group, if they're reading, for instance, a threaded discussion or a voice thread. So that, I think, is one also advantage of the online classroom.
Well, it's about time for the first hour. Maybe we can take a break and then come back maybe in 10 minutes for the next hour of discussion.
Yeah, good. So I hope you'll have questions, and we'll take it from there.
All right.
Okay, I'll be right back. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm here whenever you're ready. I'm ready whenever you are, but
There might be another Portuguese instructor coming
okay, great.
at 3:15. So can we just wait for a few more minutes?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So. So what is the weather like in Milwaukee today? I can't hear you. I guess your mic isn't turned on.
It's beautiful in Milwaukee.
Beautiful Milwaukee, okay. But yeah, we're having a beautiful day here today as well.
Is it the warmest November on record?
I think so, yeah. I thought they said something about breaking a record today, but tomorrow it's supposed to get cooler again.
Right, we're expecting a cold weekend as well.
Well, I don't think the Portuguese instructor is coming. She has appointment with with the students, so we may just go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess I wanted to ask you, what was your, first of all, do you have any questions from what we did in the first hour, or any comments or suggestions, or?
So you taught the MOOC class.
No, I haven't taught the MOOC class yet.
Okay.
It's sort of like in waiting.
Okay. So if you're, MOOC class, would you be using the synchronous model as well?
In a MOOC class, well, there are ways of using a synchronous model, but generally speaking, they're recorded. If you want to call them lectures. But I would try to, if I was going to record a lecture, I would try to make it engaging by, maybe talking about, what my name is, and then asking the students that, what is your name, right? And then following that up with like where they would have the opportunity to say their name by following it up immediately with a threaded discussion, where they would have to post a verbal post telling who they are. So it would be asynchronous. However, there could be synchronous component built into it, where as the students were doing perhaps their assignments, you would be online for an hour or two. Maybe a colleague would work with you on this too as well, where you would take questions from the students regarding what problems they were having with the assignment, or maybe so that there would be that kind of synchronous. But I think in the MOOC, as far as I can see at the moment, it would be asynchronous, but I would be trying to use asynchronous technologies to make it as engaging as possible for the students. And this is where I think the voice threads would be very helpful, as well as the threaded discussions. And again, as I was saying earlier, though, that the teacher sort of model where they would be teaching with each other, that would be the asynchronous part, but where you would make them responsible to self-organize, synchronous activities, that would be synchronous. That would be in real time, where they were interacting with each other using whatever kind of kind of technology they would choose. You would not be mandated. You all have to use Skype. You all have to use Zoom. But they would make their own selection.
Okay, so you would just give them assignment and then have them choose whatever technology they want to use for group work.
For group work. So, if, for instance, at the topic, if we were talking about famous celebrities in Germany. That was sort of like the topic where we were talking about famous celebrities. Maybe they would have to, go online and then do some research, to find a celebrity that they like. Does somebody have a mic on it? It's hard to. Okay, yeah. So, the way I would see it working, I mean, if you really wanted to start out from scratch, where if you were teaching them how to present themselves, where they came from, what they like to do, as we were doing last week, and this is where I got the idea from it, is that they would post it, for instance, on a threaded discussion. You would ask them to read each other's posts, and maybe they would find someone that interested them based on maybe where they live, and the students then might want to connect. There might be some kind of like a matchup where they start to interact with each other based on what they're reading in a threaded discussion. Then they would have to organize it themselves to meet outside of sort of the prescribed technology that you were using, and they could start interacting with each other, describing who they were, where they came from, and then this is sort of where they're following each other. They begin to follow each other in sort of like in a Facebook kind of activity. But then you would ask them to meet outside of the classroom, to share with each other again their identities in a way, and then to come up with to reach a kind of consensus where they synthesize their who they are and what's similar and what is dissimilar about them. And then one of the students would act as a scribe, perhaps for one assignment, and then submit that to the teacher. And that would be a way of knowing that the students did indeed interact with each other. So so that's how I would handle it. And then the next time around, then the other student would be the scribe, and then hand in something to the teacher based on the topic that they were. Maybe it might be vacations, where the students talk about their vacation, what they like to do on a very basic level, but then they find similarities, like maybe one student likes to go to the Bahamas and the other student likes to go to Miami, but in general, I mean, they both like to swim, so they could talk about what they like to do, but maybe they talk about where they like to do it that makes it different. So just as an example. And then they would synthesize that and then submit it to the instructor. And then if they were doing this throughout the entire course, you can imagine somebody from India hooking up with somebody from China, where they get to know each other about what they like to do, and where they're doing it in a target language, which makes it much more interesting and this kind of community building. And I think the same experience that I had that I was mentioning to you earlier, where I was interacting with somebody from Russia and we met in this Second Life space that was, that was a German museum, and we were interacting with each other in German, and it was a very basic kind of conversation, but it really made me aware of the potential for technology to engage people from around the world in these global kind of intercultural interactions. But in order to really make it meaningful, you have to give the students a task and to get to know each other. So I think that through this kind of a task, you can develop this kind of collaboration and interaction.
So, trying to figure out how to formulate my question. To me, in a lot of cases, process is just as, if not more important than final product. Mm-hmm. I can see where it's difficult to get the process when it's an oral communication and people are at a distance. It's hard to grab that, other than if they were to, I don't know, record a Skype call or Google Hangout or something like that. Do you prescribe a technology when it comes to written communication such that you would be able to see the process as it goes along?
Right. Well, I think, again, the first process would be posting something on a threaded discussion. That's how they would begin to learn about each other. They might be sending emails to each other before they begin to interact in sort of interact verbally. But
would you see that? Because that again would then be just between them, unless there were a space in which they were sharing it with you as the instructor, so you could see the
right.
growth.
Well, see, that's the issue. I wouldn't be able to see that in a MOOC, particularly in a MOOC. But would be the evidence would be, again, I wouldn't see the process, but they would be in a process. And I think that the only way for them to deliver the product is if they had done the process. I would call it more than evidence of that they have done, that they were in interaction. And I think that this is synthesizing the interaction that they had with each other. And the interaction could be, they could be learning about each other in even if it's one project, they could have been learning about each other through email, through Skype, through a threaded discussion, or even through Facebook. That's where they might have been learning about each other to talk about, their identities or their vacations or so forth. So in a MOOC environment, and I think perhaps even in an online environment, the same kind of activity could be employed, where you might not see the process, but in order to be able to know that they were involved in some kind of a process, they have to deliver some evidence. Any other question I might be able to? Are you thinking about developing a MOOC?
Actually, no. Actually, Yale is trying to develop an online Hebrew class.
Mm-hmm.
Because the lectal languages for our institution, the enrollment has been going down. And then the program was thinking maybe, the online course may be able to help us to recruit students from other area of the country,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. I believe that there is a potential for that. In the online classes that I taught here at Penn, most of the students were Penn students, and there was only like 1 or 2 times where I was able to reach out and get somebody who was not a Penn student to take the class. But and I think the reason for that is a lot of it has to do with cost. A lot of it has to do with the students taking the class because it is a requirement, so I mean, there's a lot of, but there's something that we experience. We're doing it. This is doing something for the first time. We have a kind of a collaborative agreement with the three sort of Quaker schools, we call them, with Bryn Mawr, Swarthmore, and Haverford, where they can take our courses, and then our students can go take courses from them. And so this is a lot of our students who take, or several of them who take our less commonly taught languages are from Swarthmore and Haverford, and without those students, we might not have a class. So one of the teachers who was she's teaching this week, this semester, Swahili, and we had a strike or something going on in Philadelphia, and there was also the schedule for the trains changed, and the student from Swarthmore couldn't take the class. And I got this idea, and I said, well, you know what? Maybe he can take the class. We might be able to Zoom him in, as we're Zooming right now, where he would be able to see the classroom, and we would be able to see him, and then we could interact with each other. The question was, in my mind, what kind of interaction would be going on? Would the interaction be as sort of, it's called intimate, as one would expect in a face-to-face classroom? And what I suggested to the teacher is to make the student more responsible for the interaction by doing exactly what we were just talking about, where there would be, he might be interacting with a student where they're talking about the I, this is what I think, and what do you think? And then he would have to be the scribe and synthesize what they were talking about, and then report back to the classroom. So that was one way to make sure that there was engagement going on, and to make it interesting for the students, instead of just sitting there maybe once in a while asking a question, or maybe like talking about a lot of times with students, it's like ready set speak. This is what I call a lot of times, it's like ready set speak. The students talk with each other, and then nothing happens afterwards. There's no real no real task involved where they have to report back in some way. I'm not saying for every activity there's got to be a task, but I think in many ways it's like ready, set, speak. And how do you get beyond that? So anyway, this student seems to be very happy. I sat in the classroom once, and I could see where there's some suggestions could be made. Yeah, so I mean, this is one way that we saved the course. We would have probably lost the course if the student couldn't take it. But I think there's more ways now I'm seeing that we're looking at this right now as the first time we're doing it. If it works, we might advertise the courses. We might go in a direction of advertising the courses where, hey, you don't have to come, to us. But again, I think this goes back to Lauren's question. I think that is there sort of a set kind of, is there a specific student who likes this kind of environment? There might be students who don't like this kind of environment. I think it's, you give the students the opportunity. You can either, do it from off campus, or you can do it here directly on campus.
Perhaps this is a little off topic, but you mentioned the collaboration that you have with the other 2 institutions. And I'm curious, when you all do that kind of course sharing, is it just we assume it will all even itself out in terms of cost, or does the student actually have to enroll in the course in the other institution and pay tuition to that other institution?
There's some kind of reciprocal agreement, Lauren, that the schools have that I'm not really aware of. They just sign up, And
we have something similar like that through UW system, which is why I was wondering just what your model was.
Right. And again, I don't know exactly what the model is, but there's a reciprocal kind of thing going on where I don't think there's any exchange of money. They just sign up for the class. They get a pen, password and ID, when they sign up, and that's usually how it works. So then they can use the Canvas site, they can get onto our Zoom sites and so forth. Again, all the classes up to this point, I don't think, I mean, I'm unaware of what they're doing maybe in history or what they're doing maybe, in mathematics, but we're trying this out for the first time where we have a student who is not physically in the classroom, but is doing the kind of thing that we're doing right now, and is engaging with the students.
I wanted to follow up, especially I'm glad Lauren's here, that, I think part of the problem with our UW system is the economic model that we have. And, so I've spoken with people at, I think there's a CIC collaboration too, and all of those schools kind of agreed, we're not going to charge each other, it's going to work itself out. And so when we explore this at UWM or the other campuses, the problem I'm seeing is, in my case, let's say that we could offer Portuguese online, but number one, there's other campuses who are going to feel threatened that their language enrollments are going to go down if their students can take Portuguese.
Right.
And then we can't really reciprocate with anything. And so then, we'll be charged. If it doesn't go two-way, we'll be charged because we're not, I don't get the sense from all the languages at UWM that we're willing to say, well, we'll offer French, but we'll receive Portuguese, or we'll offer Hebrew and we'll receive French, and so we're running, economically, we're running into that in terms of getting the collaboration to work.
Right.
Actually, let me speak to that for a minute. I don't know if you know that we just had a language summit that was specifically focused on French and German. So you actually do have some instructors there that are very interested in these kind of collaborations. And the model that we're looking at, what it does is it allows, by the reciprocal agreement, it would allow you to teach more upper level classes by sharing some of the lower level classes is one of the options that we're looking at, so that there would be that reciprocity. Mingyu and I have spoken about my coming down there to just talk about all this stuff because there's a lot of layers to it. So maybe when I do that, which will probably be sometime December, January, something like that, we can also have sort of an open forum discussion even, and invite all of you, or those who want to come and just chat about what I know, at least as far as where system is headed with that.
But the reciprocity would be within a specific language, right? Because we've got 3 language departments.
No, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be. So it can cross those boundaries.
Okay, and then how does the funding work? Or, is it going to be a completely new model?
No, it won't. Well, kind of. It may kind of be. So I'm still exploring that. I did have a meeting earlier today with a representative from UW System, and I'll be having follow-up communications. December 20th, we have a board meeting for my program to look at how the collaborative language program can help support all of these issues. So that will be a topic that will be discussed with deans from around UW System, and a number of other chairs and other players. So I've got everybody's ear right now. That would be
great, because I think that in our case for Portuguese, we'd be interested in being a recipient for upper level, that would sort of support our first and second year. But I don't know that there's any other campus that would be interested in us. I forget the terminology, but sending out first and second year. We might be willing to, but
you might be surprised. And Madison has also recently been knocking on my door, wondering how they can work more collaboratively with some of the other institutions as well.
Excellent.
Because we're all hurting. Our numbers are going down everywhere. So we're also looking at different teaching models, some blended options, not necessarily full online, but moving a little bit closer to more online time, possibly. But again, that's all to be determined. And I'm hoping to also host a retreat in May for some course redesign to, since these are all, for the most part, elective courses for most students, looking at different options for when we can actually physically offer them so that more people can take them and what that might look like. So there's a lot of stuff on the table with that.
Excellent. Thanks.
Sure.
So Ed, I have a follow-up question for you. This is going back to what you said, I think last week, when you said ideally 10 students is what you would like to have with this. So would you go back to talking about the workload for this? And, you know, because a lot of the things you talk about that seem to be working well seem almost like one-on-one, you know, a lot of one-on-one work going on, you know, so you're pretty much having individual sessions with a lot of students. So just if you could go back to the workload thing.
Yeah, again, I think that the ideal number, and I wouldn't go beyond that, is 10 because of the amount of work involved in teaching these classes. At least, I mean, for me personally, I know what the students need to be able to do after by the end of the semester in an online class in order to continue working, to competing, you know, at intermediate level. The first year that I taught it, it was a lot of work. I mean, because of creating the syllabus and figuring out the content and how to do this and thinking about it. So, but a lot of it boils down to the feedback that you have to give students. And that can happen either, you know, you're reading their work and you're giving them some indication of what is incorrect or their errors, or you're interviewing them to assess what their speaking abilities are. So, yeah, it's a lot of work. I would say that, again, when I teach these classes, even when I did it a second, the third, and the fourth time, I was spending at least 4 hours in advance preparing for the class. And again, I had a little bit more time in the summertime to do that. However, I was saying that I would try to cut down on that by, instead of me being the assessor, the only assessor, I would start trying to do more peer reviews where the students were you know, reviewing each other's work. And I also try to do, instead of like going into, you know, there's no way, because of the amount of output, I think there's a lot more output in an online class than there is in a face-to-face classroom. So there was no way that I could, you know, really go through every item that the students, every sentence that the students were writing and giving them, you know, sort of very discrete comments. So what I would do is do some more global content, global kind of feedback, where I would indicate where the reoccurring errors were and ask them to self-correct. So rather than indicating where maybe the mistakes could be, I would give them sort of feedback that would ask them to go back and reevaluate their essays and then look for the mistakes of their own. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, or I'd have to ask them maybe to do it again. But I think what I would introduce now is more sort of peer feedback, and I think that where the students were assessing each other's work, that would also create a situation of collaboration. And that's what I think is necessary also in an online class. The more collaborative it can be made, the more interactive it's going to be. But again, in order to cut down on the amount of time, you know, that you spend, you know, on the class, I think these are ways of like doing more sort of global feedback, and then also and having students assess each other.
And I've also heard from a lot of students saying that they also find online classes to be a lot more work than face-to-face. Have you gotten that feedback?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no question, I don't think. And sometimes it surprises me that the students will do the work, you know, because you're expecting them to do this, and you're saying, "Oh God, they're not going to get all this done." But in the summertime, again, these are summer classes that we're offering, and they're not competing with other courses, so they can really devote themselves to the course. However, some of them are working, and it becomes difficult for them to you know, get the work in on time. And here's another thing, you know, I'm not a stickler for getting the work in on time. You know, my concern is that they're going to learn, and again, this comes into the process. I mean, they have to be able to find the time to be able to do it in a meaningful way. So, and I think if you give them the time, the quality seems to be, you know, more thoughtful. So, so that's another thing that happens in the online classroom, where there is more work, and sometimes they're not able to get it in on time. And I think what I'm more interested in, though, is them completing it in some time, reasonably, you know, reasonably on time, but not doing everything at the end of the semester, of course. You know, I mean, that's not, you don't want them doing everything at the end of the semester. Yeah, it is a lot more work for the teacher, It is a lot more work for the student, but I think it's a really rewarding experience. And I think the students themselves in general seem to, in fact, you know, I've had one student say that the online classroom was the best class that he or she had taken. I don't know whether they were trying to flatter me or not, but I mean, you know, this was a very, you know, it's really reassuring and makes you want to continue, you know, teaching online. Yeah, I'd like to ask you though, what was your experience last week of, you know, doing this online kind of, was it engaging? Was it not engaging? Do you have comments? Do you have suggestions?
I think synchronous part, like the chat room, breakout rooms, are very engaging. And the way you organize, you know, providing handouts and prompts was very helpful.
That's something the students really liked too, was the written chats. So you know, where you had these different chat windows and they were all interacting with pairs, but they could see each other's work. They could get ideas from each other's work. I could see all of the chats going on at the same time and give them suggestions. I think they really liked that. And that was sort of a lead that led into the breakout rooms in which they were talking with each other. So they got experience interacting with each other, you know, in a written format, and then they would move into the oral format. And that's something that I also found is that the handouts that I would create for each class, and that was where a lot of the work came in, you know, creating the handout, envisioning what were they going to be doing in the classroom, how were they going to be interacting with each other, what did you want them to be able to learn, was time consuming. But that handout kept them on task.
I unfortunately wasn't able to attend last week because of the Waffle conference, but I'm wondering, this is something that I learned when I was teaching an online class, was how helpful it was to have sort of a step-by-step checklist almost for each day. Did you do something like that? And if so, was it just part of Canvas, or how did you do that?
It was step by step, and it was usually every day we did the same thing so they would know what to expect we were going to do. So we would start out with maybe sort of like an introduction. I would introduce the topics and we would interact with each other. They would be talking, or they would be speaking the answer, or they would be responding in a written format. So that's where I got them to sort of engage with each other and with me, basically with me learning the content. And then we go into these chat windows, and then they would interact with each other based on what we were just learning in, you know, in sort of the teacher-centered, you know, section of the class. And then they would go into the next format would be they would go into the oral chat rooms and speak with each other. And then I would bring them back into the plenary session, and I would ask them what they talked about, what did they learn about each other. So each day they had this sort of like this format where there was sort of like a teacher-centered, although I don't like using that, but that was really what it was. The very beginning was more teacher-centered. And then they would move into sort of collaborating with each other in written chats and oral chats, and then reporting back to me what they talked about or what they learned about each other. And then at home, they would do exercises that would reinforce what we did in class. So they would do presentations, basically speaking, in voice threads. I would also develop quizzes for them because I never really tried to explain the grammar. The grammar I tried to teach the grammar through using it, but I know that many of them needed some help with the grammar, and then this is where I developed quizzes for them. So that's how that basically worked. It was the same day. They knew what to expect. They knew what to prepare, and they knew what they were basically going to do for homework. The only thing that changed was the content. Yeah, I think it's very important, is having the students sort of expect to know in advance what it is, how it's going to work, you know, yeah.
So in your, I imagine you also have like the languages in Penn.
Oh yeah.
So are they moving toward the fully online module, or are they moving toward more of a hybrid model now?
I wouldn't say we're moving in that direction. We've done it. We've done a couple classes. in Turkish. Arabic is fully online in the summertime. We do have an Arabic class, which is really, the enrollments are very good. I don't know what the teacher is doing, but she has enrollments that go from 10 to about 15. And she has 101, kind of 102 kind of Arabic classes. And then Italian is, that's not a less common language, but Italian has been quite successful. So, and Korean is part of the Penn Language Center. They do maybe 1 or 2 classes in the summertime. Business Chinese usually has 1 class in the summertime, and they're totally fully online classes. But again, these are still, pilot kind of programs, projects, and we've been doing them although for 4 years, and we're just learning about them. We're just seeing what's going on. Do they work? What doesn't work? That kind of thing. But,
do your students who are going to take these online courses have any sort of module they have to take ahead of time to, this is how it works to be an online learner or anything, or they just jump right in with the instructor on the first day?
No. They all have, I've was the first one to do an online class. When I meet with the teachers, I highly recommend that they meet with each student or in sort of groups in Zoom, explaining to them, or maybe whatever it was, Adobe Connect, explaining to them what it is they're to expect. Okay, what the technology that they're going to use. And to make sure that, for instance, they have headsets. I mean, these are sort of like the technical sides of things. So, and how to use the headset, how to set it up to make it work, so that when we hit day 1, they can hit the ground running. All right, as far as the technology is concerned. Now, and then also the summer school program also runs for the students these sessions where they get online with the students and they explain to them the technology that they're going to be using. They're all pretty much familiar with Canvas and how to use Canvas, but what they're not familiar with is, for instance, Zoom and Adobe Connect, and how does that fit in with the online class. Yeah, I mean, I think that's very important because, and I was giving, I would also, the other thing I would do is I would write the students an email to set up these kinds of sessions. And I would ask them what their experience with technology was. And I had one time a student wrote back and said, I have no experience with technology, and wrote also, I don't like technology. So she was on campus right before the course started, and I asked her to come into my office and we would speak. So I asked her to talk about this. And I said, are you sure you want to take this course? She said, I don't like technology, but what are you going to do? So I explained to her what the course was going to be like. And she took the course and succeeded.
So you don't normally offer both face-to-face and online at the same time. You only offer the online in summer, right?
Well, no, I can't speak for all of the languages. I think in Arabic, they try to offer both face-to-face and online. But if we're doing it in Korean in the summertime, we don't have a face-to-face component. The only course that the student can take is the online class. So it's a mixture, I suppose. But so in our case, if we have a Chinese business class, for instance, that's online, we're not going to offer that class face-to-face, because for one thing, it creates competition for both formats.
Ed, going back to what you were just talking about, do you find that you have a high attrition rate with these classes? Because that's been sort of our experience, but I think part of it is what you were saying, that they're not really prepared for. Yeah,
in the online classes, if I start out with 8 students, I usually have 8 students at the end. As I mentioned earlier, though, I did have this one instance where a student dropped out of the class and I didn't know what was going on. I thought, I wanted to find out because he was so good. And I emailed him and he wrote me back and said this was not the environment that I feel comfortable in learning a language. So attrition doesn't seem to be, an issue. I mean, the issue is the enrollments. I mean, as I said, the enrollments would be anywhere from 3 to 10. So you were never really quite sure what you were going to get. And I think the reason why there's not the attrition is because they start out and they have to pay. You know, they have the the tuition. They pay it up front, and they're motivated too. I mean, for one thing, they might be wanting to take the language requirement in the summertime, or maybe they're a senior. Some of the students are seniors, and this was also Lauren's question, what is the motivation for the students? Some of them are seniors who would just want to learn a language, or maybe take a second language. Some of them are taking for requirements, and also we have students who are employees taking a summer course in the summer. So we have a very mixed group of people taking these summer classes. They could be employees, students who are finishing up, or students who need to finish, who have to do a requirement.
So those 6-week courses is equivalent to usually 12-week
Yes.
content? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we do in the summertime is equivalent to what a student would do, like in a summer session 1 would be equivalent to a 101 class.
So it's 2 hours a day.
2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes.
5 days a week.
4 days a week.
4 days.
And on the 5th day, that's when I would have an interview with the students. I would interview them. I would meet with them and do an interview. And I would set up times with them to maybe 20-minute interviews.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, do you all have other questions? No? Yeah, we're in the process of developing Hebrew Online, and
cool.
also a ESL IO test prep course online, and possibly a hybrid for other, lectal language courses. So this is an ongoing effort. Thank you so much for giving us the webinars.
Sure, absolutely. Can I ask you, for your Hebrew class, what kind of technologies are you considering to use?
Let me see if
Yael's not here.
Oh, she's gone. She teaches part-time with Middlebury.
Ah.
She uses Canvas and Panopto, which is a new, video solution. So she likes it a lot, and if she decides to go with Canvas and Panopto and Zoom, we'll support that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear how it goes.
She just started, so
yeah.
Because we're really, because of the overall enrollment for the college, for the whole UW system, it's going down. We're trying to find ways to grow our enrollment, and so a lot of it's experimental.
Right. I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's where we all are right now. It's still experimental. It's still looking at. Although I've been doing this or I did this for like 4 years, it still feels like this is new. Every time you do it, you learn something different. You get different techniques, different strategies. So I think it's an ongoing kind of process.
But Ed, a lot of the things that I saw you using gave me more optimism that I've seen in the past, because I feel like a lot of our administrators, at least who don't know anything about language teaching, think that everything can just be asynchronous, and you can deliver it as if it were an economics class, and that's it. And when we try to sort of, when we've been resistant about doing this online, they don't necessarily understand. So I feel like I'm still concerned about how labor intensive this seems, but I sort of feel like, at least with the technology and a lot of things you're doing, there are ways to make it a lot more interactive and focus on speaking.
Right, and as I said in the earlier hour, I taught a class this summer on how to develop an online class and how to do a MOOC. And these were graduate students, and they had to evaluate a MOOC and or MOOCs or online learning courses. And what they found is that what they missed was the interaction. They missed the interaction, that it was not interactive enough to really be, a language course. It was more content-based. And they were learning about the language, but they weren't using the language.
So what about the self-paced model? Is it possible even to deliver a self-paced language course, like online course?
Well, I feel this way. I mean, I think the course that the students were using for the German class was more like a self-paced class. But I couldn't see how they were going to learn to interact with each other. There's still the interaction was missing. It was still, you might be able to imagine yourself or learn, terms and for a dialogue that you might have, but you weren't practicing it. So, but in these self-paced classes, there might be the option for students to, as they're, to connect with people who are taking the self-paced classes, but to connect with other people who are taking the self-paced classes and to interact with each other. But again, you would have to have the students self-organize to form that kind of interaction. But in our, and I think in your situation too, you can, instead of making it optional, you kind of you mandate it. You say, this is what you've got to do. You've got to be able to interact with each other inside of the classroom and then outside the classroom. So in that case, it's not saying, okay, you look for people to interact with. You make it a requirement.
Well, I don't think Lauren's on anymore, right? Yeah, because we have there's something in the UW system called this flex option, where you have students who are I can't even explain it well, but they're pretty much working at their own pace to get a degree. And so we've been approached in Spanish about allowing them to do Spanish pretty much at their own pace, but I mean, it's just unclear to me, because it seems like it would be completely content-based with no interaction, because all they really do is that, you can assess them at the end, but you're not offering class at all.
And again, as I was saying earlier, I was approached to find out what my opinion was I think there was a movement in Florida to replace language learning with computer coding. And there's a huge difference between language learning and computer coding. And I don't think people understand, the difference between the two. One is very solitary activity, and the other one is a very communicative, interpersonal activity. And I think that the importance of that becomes apparent if you're going to be talking about MOOCs, where students are interacting with each other in a global environment, where they get to learn about each other. They learn about, each other's cultures, sort of like these intercultural kind of exchanges. I mean, I know we're going off track right here, but this is where I think the importance of language learning comes in. If we can get students to a point, even in our online classes, to move them in the direction of trying to learn about other people, maybe say, okay, you've self-organized, with your fellow student to meet and talk about, an issue later on. And I think this is happening too, more where there are opportunities for students to interact with native speakers. So you're preparing them to interact with native speakers, and to learn about the world, to build bridges, and I think that you can't do that with computer coding. That's not going to happen. And I think that the real value of language learning is preparing students to be able to learn about each other, and maybe, as time goes on, to interact with native speakers. And maybe the native speaker, I mean, who knows? We develop these reciprocal kinds of, activities where students learn each other's language. So, I mean, I think this is where the value of language learning is, that I don't think maybe administrators understand.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's an exciting time to be a language learner. I mean, a language teacher, I think, it's a challenging time, but I think it's also a very interesting time.
Right, like comparing with like 10 years ago, we didn't have this many tools.
No, yeah. And it really requires figuring out, those tools, which tool works, because not all tools do, as you know.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we can wrap it up. And thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ed.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. We learned a lot. Thank you
That's
so
cool.
much.
I'm glad. And I will send you the recording.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Adios.
Adios.